This video is sponsored by Sunflex UK. Dealing with disappointment is a fact of life. Things don't work out as planned, and the best we can do is learn from the experience and move on. Any architect who has been around for a while will tell you about their unbuilt projects, missed opportunities, unrealized designs, lots of work and nothing to show for it. I've had several jobs over the years that could have been brilliant if only they'd been built. So why didn't these projects go from the drawing board to the building site, and what can be learned from it? Each project was different. Some were always going to be difficult. Others seemed straightforward, but circumstances changed over time. If you are thinking of altering or extending your home, or even building a new house, there are some valuable lessons to draw from these projects. Now, I don't think people want to listen to an architect whining about jobs that never got built, so I'm going to use these projects to give you an insight into how the design and construction process actually works. This video is part of a series, and I've put a link to the Unbuilt Projects playlist at the end. I started my own architecture practice back in 2009, and this was one of the first projects I took on. The client lived in an upmarket neighbourhood in Edinburgh, but they also owned a holiday cottage 2 hours north in the Scottish Highlands. I don't even know how old this cottage was. It had very thick external walls built from clay and stone, and it had a very unusual feature inside. These timbers are a crook frame. They are whole tree trunks or branches held together using large timber dowels, and the frame supports the roof. I'd read about them in books, but I'd never worked on a building with a crook frame before or since. The cottage was on the side of a hill, about half a mile from a large loch. There were trees and large shrubs at ground level which sheltered the cottage, but they also restricted the view. The client needed more space, and they wanted an upper area to view over the loch. They were keen on the idea that the new extension be distinct from the existing cottage, but that it somehow also respect the original building. Now, that might sound like having your cake and eating it, but it's not the first time I've been asked to design something that reconciles these two apparent opposites. We agreed that the existing crook frame should be refurbished. We couldn't get rid of it after all because it held up the roof. We even discussed feature lighting to show off the frame. Creating a usable space upstairs posed a problem because the cottage is rather narrow and the roof isn't especially tall. To solve the problem of creating more space on the ground floor and the upper floor, I made the extension wider than the cottage. A wider roof is taller, and this creates a usable space upstairs from where the client could enjoy the view above the trees to the loch. In a flash of inspiration, I decided to use the modern equivalent of crook framing to support the new roof. These large structural elements would be glulam beams. Several different pieces of wood glued together in a workshop, then transported to site and used instead of rafters for the new roof. The glulam beams would be exposed, and the idea was that they follow the same spacing or rhythm of the existing crook frame. The roof itself would be clad in natural copper, which would turn a pleasant green colour or patina after a few years in this exposed location. Rather than bring the roof to a sharp point, I decided to create a rolled ridge. This would look softer, but it's also a trick to reduce the overall height of the roof. If the two slopes continue to a point, the roof would be taller. This would help reduce the difference in height between the existing cottage and the new extension. Being on a hillside, the ground sloped, so the base of the extension would be set off the ground on a plinth made from nice facing brick. The walls of the extension were designed to be clad in timber, matching the glulam beams. Now, in reality, glulam is often made from Douglas fir, while good quality timber cladding is usually western red cedar or Siberian larch, but you get the idea. I specifically created a larger entrance to the cottage, somewhere to get your bearings when you arrived. I prefer an entrance to a house to arrive at the main event, which is usually the kitchen, but in this case the new space upstairs would be the main living area. For that reason, the stairs to that living area is open to the entrance. It's not within its own stairwell or hallway. There are no doors separating it from the space. Furthermore, the living area overlooks the kitchen below. The two most important spaces in the house need to be connected, although we decided not to create a direct link because the client feared the smell of cooking would rise up and disturb the guests. So there would be a glass screen where the guests could see down to the kitchen. The master bedroom on the ground floor is just off the entrance area and is entered via a dressing room which goes right up to the roof, with a skylight facing east to provide illumination in the morning. The living area upstairs has a balcony with a panoramic view of the loch. I designed the roof to span over this so that the outdoor area had some shelter, This would allow it to be used more often, and I designed an opening in that roof the same size as the dressing room skylight, so anyone on the balcony could look down on the driveway and see guests approaching. I like the one exposed external glulam beam on the balcony. It explains to the outside world how the roof is held up. The view was a major part of what informed this design, and the glazing would have to be very high performance, both to stand up to the harsh weather and to keep the cottage warm. This is a good time to mention the sponsor of today's video. Sunflex UK design and manufacture high-quality aluminium windows and doors, including triple glazing to meet the highest energy standards. I made a video about how Sunflex products enhanced this project of mine. They offer a great balance between cost and quality, but don't take my word for it. I discussed the cost of the glazing in the video, so you can check it out for yourselves. I've put a link up here and in the description. It took some time going back and forth to develop this design. I didn't produce it overnight and present it fully formed to my client. The design process is iterative or cyclical, and it produces incremental changes over several versions until the design evolves into its final form. It starts off with a well-defined brief or agreement between the client and architect about what is needed. But the brief is just a starting point. I usually go back and forth 2 or 3 times with a client before we arrive at a design everyone is happy with. In simple terms, you never build the first thing you draw. Keep in mind, this is just a concept model. It's there to allow the client to see what is possible, and they loved it. So what went wrong? Why didn't this neat little design get built? Long story short, the client didn't want to spend that much money on a remote holiday cottage. The fear was if they invested more money than the cottage was worth, they would lose money if they ever sold it. That isn't an unreasonable concern, it's one I've heard a lot from clients over the years. Now, given this was designed during my first year in business, I've learned a lot since then. So what would I have done differently? Aside from any design considerations, I now start every project with a discussion about construction costs. There's no point investing time and fees into exploring options if the overall concept is likely to cost more than the client is willing to spend. In the 14 years since this was designed, I have built dozens of projects and learned the hard way about construction costs. Most clients have no idea how much it might cost, so I often ask whether they have a sum they do not wish to go beyond, and at that point, it's up to my own knowledge and experience to decide if that amount of money is sufficient. If not, I usually advise the client to start prioritizing their wish list, and I tell them we may have to make compromises in the design. In other words, they won't be getting everything they want. If you are thinking of altering or extending a house in the UK and would like to discuss this with me, you can book a consultation via the Real Life Architect website. I've put a link in the description below. In the end, I designed a modest porch at the entrance, and new stairs to access the upper area, and a dormer to the side of the cottage. The client was happy with that, but because it was so far away from where I lived, I wasn't involved during construction. So there you have it. Good ideas aren't enough. An architect needs a good head for business too. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like. That really helps the channel. My name is Neil, and I am a real-life architect in the UK. I make new videos every week looking at the reality of altering and extending private homes, as well as discussing issues affecting the construction industry and the architecture profession. If you like the sound of that, please subscribe to keep up to date.